Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that can be a real pain in the neck, literally, wheel-bearing noise. If you've ever heard a grinding, growling, or humming sound coming from your car, especially when you're turning or accelerating, then you might have a bad wheel bearing. In this video, we'll dive into the signs and symptoms of a defective wheel bearing, explain what causes them to go bad, and show you how to diagnose the problem yourself. We'll also talk about the importance of getting them replaced as soon as possible and give you an idea of how much it will cost. So, if you're worried that you might have a bad wheel bearing, stick around and let's get this fixed. Have you ever heard a strange noise coming from your car while driving? It could be a grinding, humming, or roaring sound that gets louder as you accelerate. If so, you might have a defective wheel bearing. There are a few telltale signs that your wheel bearing is going bad. Here are some of the most common symptoms. Grinding noise. This is the most common symptom of a bad wheel bearing. The noise will usually start out as a faint grinding sound, but it will get louder and more frequent as the bearing wears down. Humming noise. A humming noise can also be a sign of a bad wheel bearing. This noise is usually caused by the bearing vibrating as it spins. Roaring noise. A roaring noise is a less common symptom of a bad wheel bearing, but it can be a sign of a more serious problem. This noise is usually caused by the bearing breaking apart. Vibration. You may also feel a vibration in the steering wheel or the floor of your car if you have a bad wheel bearing. This vibration will usually get worse as you accelerate. Loose wheel. In some cases, a bad wheel bearing can cause the wheel to feel loose. This is a dangerous condition, as it can cause the wheel to come off while you are driving. Wheel bearings can fail for a number of reasons, including wear and tear. Wheel bearings are constantly under stress, and they will eventually wear out over time. Lack of lubrication. Wheel bearings need to be lubricated regularly to prevent them from wearing out prematurely. Damage. Wheel bearings can be damaged by potholes, curbs, and other road hazards. Overheating. Wheel bearings can overheat if they are driven for long periods of time at high speeds. If you think you have a bad wheel bearing, it is important to have it checked out by a mechanic as soon as possible. A bad wheel bearing can cause your car to become unstable and difficult to control, and it can also lead to more serious problems if it is not repaired. Replacing a wheel bearing is a relatively complex job that should be done by a qualified mechanic. However, if you are mechanically inclined, you can replace a wheel bearing yourself. Here are the basic steps involved. Remove the wheel and tire. Remove the brake caliper and rotor. Remove the hub assembly. Remove the old wheel bearing. Install the new wheel bearing. Reassemble the hub assembly, brake caliper, rotor, and wheel. A bad wheel bearing can be a serious problem, but it is important to remember that it is not always easy to diagnose. If you are experiencing any of the symptoms listed above, it is important to have your car checked out by a mechanic as soon as possible. The first step in checking for defective wheel bearings is to listen for unusual noises. A common symptom of a bad wheel bearing is a grinding or roaring noise that gets louder as you drive faster. This noise is often described as sounding like a metal-on-metal grinding or a low-pitched hum. Another way to check for bad wheel bearings is to feel for excessive play in the wheel. To do this, jack up the car and grab the top and bottom of the tire. Try to rock the tire back and forth. If you feel any play, it could be a sign of a bad wheel bearing. Finally, you can also visually inspect the wheel bearing for signs of damage. Look for any cracks, chips, or pitting on the bearing surface. If you see any damage, it's best to replace the wheel bearing as soon as possible. In addition to the grinding noise and excessive play, there are a few other signs that may indicate a bad wheel bearing. These include vibration in the steering wheel. If you feel a vibration in the steering wheel, especially at higher speeds, it could be a sign of a bad wheel bearing. Uneven tire wear. If you notice that one tire is wearing more quickly than the others, it could be a sign of a bad wheel bearing. ABS light coming on. If your ABS light comes on, it could be a sign of a bad wheel bearing. It is not recommended to drive with a defective wheel bearing. A bad wheel bearing can cause the wheel to come off the car, which could lead to an accident. If you suspect that you have a bad wheel bearing, it is best to have it replaced as soon as possible. If you continue to drive with a bad wheel bearing, it can cause the bearing to seize up. This can cause the wheel to lock up, which could lead to an accident. In addition, a bad wheel bearing can cause damage to other parts of the car, such as the axle and the brake caliper. Wheel bearings are an important part of your car's suspension system. They allow the wheels to spin freely while supporting the weight of the car. If you suspect that you have a bad wheel bearing, it is important to have it checked out by a mechanic as soon as possible.